Okay, class, today we're going to be talking about tariffs and supply and demand. So first off, a tariff is a tax. Specific tariff is levied as a fixed charge for each unit of imported goods. An ad valorem tariff is levied as a fraction of the value of the imported goods. So let's consider how tariff affects the market. Suppose that in absence of trade, the price of wheat is higher in home than it is in foreign. With trade, wheat will be shipped from the foreign to the home until the price difference is eliminated. Import demand curve is the difference between the quantity that home consumers demand minus the quantity that home producers supply at each price. This is what that looks like in the formula. And here's what that looks like graphically. Export supply curve is a difference between the quantity that producers supply minus the quantity that foreign consumers demand. Here's that formula. Here's what it looks like graphically. So in equilibrium, the demand should equal supply. Home demand minus home supply equals foreign supply minus foreign demand. And the same is true for addition. So world demand equals world supply. And here's that graphically. See the equilibrium point there in the middle. So effects on the tariff. These act like transportation costs, making sellers unwilling to ship goods unless the home price exceeds the foreign price by the amount of the tariff, where P sub T minus T equals P sub T star. This makes the price rise in the home market and fall in the foreign market. So here you can see that graphically, where we have the home market on the left, the world market with the price lower than that in the home market, and then the foreign market. So the world market is a composition of both the home and the foreign markets. So you can see how the world market is sort of in between the home and foreign markets. So some more effects of a tariff. So because the price in the home market rises from PW under free trade to PT with the tariff, home producers supply more and home consumers demand less. So the quantity of imports falls. So in the foreign market, price falls from PW under free trade to PT star with the tariff. Producers supply less and consumers demand more. So the quantity of exports falls from Q sub W to Q sub T. The quantity of home imports demanded equals the quantity of foreign exports supplied. When that formula holds, the increase in price in home can be less than the amount of the tariff. So, let's look at these effects on a small country. When a country is small, it has no effect on the world price because its demand is an insignificant part. The foreign price does not fall, and it remains at PW. Price in the home market rises by the full amount of the tariff. So you can see that here graphically. So measuring the amount of protection. The effective rate of protection measures this. It represents the change in value that firms in an industry add to the production process when trade policy changes. This depends on changes in the prices. Effective rates of protection often differ from tariff rates because tariffs affect sectors other than the protected sector. These cause indirect effects. For example, suppose that automobiles sell in world markets for $8,000 They are made from factors of production worth 6,000. The value added is 2,000, which is the difference of those two. So suppose the country puts a 25% tariff on imported autos, so that home assembly firms can now charge up to 10,000 instead of 8,000. The effective rate of protection equals 4,000 minus 2,000 divided by 2,000, which equals 100%. In this case, the effective rate of protection is greater than the tariff rate. Tariffs raise the price of goods in the importing country, so it hurts consumers and benefits home producers. In addition, the government gains tariff revenue. So how to measure this? We use the concepts of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Consumer surplus is the amount consumers gain from purchases by computing the difference in the price actually paid with the price that they'd be willing to pay. The price increases, consumer demand decreases, as well as consumer surplus. So we derive this. So here's the geometry of it. You can see that triangle A represents consumer surplus at P2, while a combination of A and B represents consumer surplus at P1. Producer surplus is the amount that producers gain from sales by computing the difference in price, the minimum price at which they would be willing to sell. When price increases, quantity supplied increases. So here's that geometry. Measuring the cost. Tariff raises the price in the importing country. You can see what happens to consumer and producer surplus. There's a change in welfare due to the tariff. So here's that graphically. For a large country whose imports and exports affect world prices, welfare effect of a tariff is ambiguous. Triangles B and D represent the efficiency loss. Tariff distorts production and consumption decisions. The rectangle E represents terms of the trade gain. So part of government revenue, rectangle E represents the terms of trade gain, and part rectangle C represents some of the loss in consumer surplus. So the government gains at the expense of consumers and foreigners. Here's the net welfare effects. You can see those triangles we talked about earlier. So tariffs can lead trading partners to retaliate with their own tariffs. So tariffs are hard to remove, and large tariffs may induce producers to engage in wasteful activities to avoid paying tariffs. Now we have an export subsidy. Export subsidy raises the price in the exporting country, decreasing its consumer surplus and increasing its producer surplus. Government revenue falls due to paying for the export subsidy. And the export subsidy lowers the price paid in importing countries. So here's what the effect looks like graphically. Export subsidies damage national welfare. Those triangles B and D represent efficiency losses. The area B plus C plus D plus F plus G represents the cost of the subsidy paid by the government. So export subsidies in Europe. So there's a government branch in the European Union that sets high prices for agricultural products and subsidizes exports to dispose of the excess output. The cost of this is about $30 billion, more than its benefits. So here's what that looks like graphically. So we have an import quota, which is a restriction on the quantity of a good that may be imported. These are enforced by licenses or quota rights. A binding quota will push up the price of an import. When a quota is used, the government receives no revenue. The extra revenues that those selling imports get is called a quota rent. So a good example of this is the world raw sugar price. A voluntary export restraint works like an import quota, except that the quota is imposed by the exporting country rather than the importing quota.